The scriptures I chose for today, there's actually more of them than normal, but they're very short. So listen for God's word. The first is Psalm 24:1. The earth and everything in it belongs to God. Proverbs 14:31. Those who oppress the poor insult their maker, but those who are kind to those most vulnerable honor God. Matthew 25, verse 40. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it," referring to feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, etc., "just as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." Micah 6:8, which those of you who have been here since I've been here should all think of in terms of the big three. God has told you, O human, what is good. And what does God require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God? Mark 12:29 through 31. Jesus said, "The first and greatest commandment is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And the second is this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other greater commandment than these." Matthew 7:12. Jesus said, "In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. This is the law and the prophets." John 8:32. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And finally, Philippians 2:3 and 4. Be of one mind with each other. Love each other. Be deep-spirited friends. Don't be selfishly ambitious. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet-talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand to others. There ends the readings. There were quite a few jokes about July 4th, more quantity than quality necessarily. How come there aren't any knock-knock jokes about America? Because freedom rings. Yeah, I know. What's the difference between a duck and George Washington? One has a bill on his face and the other has his face on a bill. Did you hear the one about the Liberty Bell? Yeah, it cracked me up. What did one flag say to the other flag? Nothing. It just waved. And finally, wait for it. What would you get if you crossed George Washington with cattle feed? The fodder of our country. All right. I feel like I've accomplished my goal if there's an audible groan, and you did your part. So it's 4th of July Sunday, and as usual, I want to share a message that feels relevant to what's going on in the world. I've been here long enough now that I think most of you understand why I approach patriotic holidays with a degree of caution. Because nationalism and patriotism are tricky things for us as followers of Jesus. I'm not going to get into it deeply today. But if you're new to us, I'll just say that patriotism is tricky because we believe that God loves all peoples of all nations and we're all God's children, and we don't believe God has a favorite nation or a chosen nation in this world today. The Bible does not make a case for what's often referred to as American exceptionalism. There's nothing wrong with us loving our country and being proud of who we are at our best. and deeply appreciating the beautiful ideals of freedom and justice and liberty for all that are at the heart of who we are as a nation and our founding documents and intentions, even though, let's face it, there were some glaring omissions and blind spots at the time those documents were written, i.e. people of color, slavery, women, indigenous people. But those things aside, there are some beautiful things to celebrate that we can love about this country, and I do. And it's wonderful and important to celebrate them, to name the good stuff, as long as we're honest about the extent to which our nation at times has not lived up to our own best ideals. So to be clear, okay, it's a beautiful thing to be thankful for our country and to celebrate our independence and our liberty and the price many people paid to keep us free. But to state the obvious, our nation is experiencing some very seriously troubled and troubling times at this point in history. And you don't need me to account the stress and the strain that we're under right now. Given the recent Supreme Court ruling and the court's apparent agenda and the January 6th Commission hearings, but as I've been paying close attention to the January 6th hearings, as disturbing as they are and will continue to be, I actually find myself feeling grateful that we live in a country where hearings like this can happen. And where we can openly discuss and debate what happened or what is happening. I'm grateful we have a process in motion for getting to the full truth of what happened on that dark day in our nation's history, referring to January 6, 21. I'm grateful that people are compelled to tell the truth under oath and that there are consequences for lying under oath. I'm grateful that those who find the moral fortitude and courage to publicly speak truth to and about power are not disappearing in the night. Or at least not yet, or being killed. I think we need to pray for Cassidy Hutchinson and anyone else who comes forward that boldly as well. So far, be it by a thread, our democratic institutions are holding. Have you felt that recently? I have, and I am proud of that. I'm glad about that. And there's at least a hope that we can pull ourselves back from the brink of losing our democracy completely and reaffirm one of our nation's most cherished principles, which is that no one's above the law. Everyone is accountable. We'll see. But there is much for which to be grateful and even proud as we are moving through this troubling time. Now, as I shared with our morning devotion group this last week, and in case you don't know, Mondays through Fridays at 8 a.m. we have a morning devotional group on Zoom. Share a little reading, have a little silence, talk about it, pray for each other. Lasts about a half hour on average. It's been great. There's usually 10 to close to 20 people on there. We've been doing that since the pandemic started, so sign on and join us. But I shared with the group this last week that I've been thinking a lot lately about how those of us who are doing our best to be spirit-centered people and followers of Jesus, for whom that would describe your spiritual journey, how we can and should bring our faith-based commitments and truths into our efforts to impact social issues in our culture and the course of our nation's evolution. To put it another way, what's a healthy and appropriate and spirit-led way for our Christian faith, or any religion's faith, to influence our civic engagement and our politics? One of our nation's earliest and clearest principles, or values, was the separation of church and state. We're not a monarchy. We don't believe in kings or presidents for life. We believe in deliberately limiting centralized power. We have checks and balances that were established so that no one branch of government could get too powerful. We've seen recently how the judicial branch can, unfortunately, become politicized and partisan in its agenda. And we have a serious problem with that now. But my point here is that one of our country's deepest values is that we don't believe any one group's perspective or religious beliefs should gain enough political power to dominate and be forced on anyone. We're not a theocracy. No one religious community has the right to force everyone in our nation to obey its code or its priorities, and I'm grateful for that. So this past week, I shared in one of the morning devotions a quote from Reverend Jim Wallace. He's the founder of Sojourners Community in Washington, D.C. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I think it points toward a healthier way for us to bring our faith into the public sphere. And here's the quote that Jim said. He said, "I believe in the separation of church and state, absolutely. But I don't believe in the separation of public life from our values, our basic values, and for many of us, our religious values." So here's my point. What if instead of framing our conversations as arguments between opposing sides, we started talking about our deepest and most cherished values with each other? I've often mentioned my son-in-law. He's one of the more conservative people that I am blessed to have in my life. And I really mean that. He's just a great guy, and I know his heart, and he's a person of deep integrity, and he's really smart, and he reads, and he and I see the world really differently. And when we try to go back and forth on a political point and counterpoint, it rarely gets beyond certain television stations' talking points. But when I say, what do you believe in? I mean, what's making you tick? Then the whole tone of the conversation changes. One time he said, and I think I shared this anecdote with you. He said after a long conversation that was hard, but we went at it and we talked and we communicated and it wasn't really getting anywhere. And finally he said, the one who summed it up for me was Bill Maher. He said, I was watching Bill Maher. He said, don't get me wrong, I don't watch that very often, but I was channel changing, I was surfing, and I came across Bill Maher. And he said, and Bill Maher started apologizing to people on the conservative side of the political spectrum. He said, I need to apologize to you. You're not dumb. I've been calling you dumb. And Bill Maher said, I have learned something. You're not dumb. You're afraid. And my son-in-law said, he nailed it. He's exactly right. I'm afraid. I said, of what? I said, I'm afraid of what happens if you progressive people get control of the country's agenda. And I said, okay, let's talk about what you're afraid of. And by then we were both tired. But we just kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, let's talk about that. I think it might get us somewhere better. And when we've talked about basic values, he'll say, I value freedom. I value security. I'm scared that my kids aren't going to be safe. I said, yeah, I'm right there with you. We can agree on that. Now let's talk about what gets us there. Anyway, I don't want to take real long. We have communion yet, but I chose the scriptures that I shared with you this morning because I think they give us a wonderful sampling of some of the basic values at the heart of our faith. You probably felt them as I was reading them, but let me just go over them so you don't miss it. They said, first of all, remember that how you treat other people, and especially those most vulnerable, is how you treat God. How you treat the poor is how you treat God. They tell us, do justice, act in ways that are fair. Be as fair as you possibly can with everyone, always. Love kindness. The Dalai Lama said, that's my religion. Kindness is my whole religion. Be humble. Walk humbly with God. I once heard humility defined as not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. Don't be too full of yourself. Don't think you know it all. Don't have your mind made up before you even enter into a conversation. Maybe someone has something to teach you. Be humble. Love God, and according to Jesus, that means loving your neighbor as yourself. Treat people the way you'd like to be treated. Know the truth. Sometimes it's hard to get at it, but it makes a huge difference. Deal with what's real, with reality, with truth, because it will make you free. You can't be free if you're not dealing with truth, and there will be no freedom if people are being lied to. Don't be selfishly ambitious. Don't want something for yourself deliberately at someone else's expense. And this, of course, is a blanket indictment and rejection of predatory capitalism. Anyway, that's not an exhaustive list. It's just a beginning. But let's get clear on who we are. And then instead of arguing who's right, who's wrong, we can start saying, yeah, what makes you tick? Why do you want what you want? Let's talk about that. And even if they don't ask you what makes you tick, that's okay. Let's practice the prayer of St. Francis, to seek to understand rather than to be understood. Okay, we got to end. Let's go back to where I was with the kids. And Chris and Tom, would you find that slide with the words on it? I turned it into a song, okay? It's a little song. Let's see if we can learn this together. It goes like this. All I want is what is real. Try that, ready? All I want is what is real. All I want is what is true. Try that. All I want is what is true. All I want is what is loving and just for all of us. All I want is what is loving and just for all of us. This is where I'm coming from when I say God's will be done. Okay, let's all stand together. You've been sitting for a while. Now remember my rules, aggressive mistakes. Okay, I seek volume as opposed to melodic accuracy. All right, here we go, ready? All I want is what is real. All I want is what is true. All I want is what is loving and just for all of us. This is where I'm coming from when I say God's will be done. Okay, that was not bad. There's room for improvement. Let's try it one more time. This time we'll say we instead of I. All we want is what is real. Much better, that's good. All we want is what is true. All we want is what is loving and just for all of us. This is where we're coming from when we say God's will be done. Please be seated. Nice job. Give yourselves a little hand there. That was good. Okay, well, it's just about time for communion. Sermon hasn't ended yet, so keep it going. But it's ending as we lead into communion. I finished a Richard Rohr book that I've been quoting from at various points with you all. You all know how much I appreciate and love him. He says this will probably be the last book he ever writes. And he ends it by talking about communion. And he says, you know, Jesus, here's a quote, Jesus gave us something that he did not say we needed to think about or agree upon or look at or even worship. He just said, do this. And he said it was like an audio-visual aid, a sacred ritual for a community that would summarize his whole lasting message for the world. And he said these are the things that are proclaimed through this sacrament. It's a table that everybody's welcome to, where everybody's fed, where everyone has an equal place. Everyone eats, everyone shares. There's enough for everyone because no one takes too much while someone else doesn't have enough. No human authority owns this table. It's God's. And God wants us all around it. And God knows we're not perfect. That's why Peter was at the table. That's why Judas was at the table. And that's why God wants us to come just as we are. We're all welcome at this table, not because we're good or because we got things figured out, but because we're hungry for God and for love and for what's real. And we need to be fed. So, whoever you are, wherever you are welcome at this table.